Good evening there, everybody. What is happening? Hopefully, you all are having a wonderful day today. So, when it comes down to it, I thought that I would talk about this little topic that I found particularly interesting. And this topic is going to be that over the possibility, at least from what I've heard in recent sources, of there being a possible Terrence Bud Crawford versus Mikey Garcia fight. Now, if you just had to ask me initially, do I think that this fight more than likely is going to happen next? No, personally, I do not believe that this fight is going to happen next. I don't think that Terrence Bud Crawford would really have his sights set on a Mikey Garcia, especially at this point in time when Terrence Bud Crawford, I believe that he's turning 35 years old this year. I believe his birthday is somewhere around September, so he is going to be turning 35 this year, basically meaning that Terrence Bud Crawford does not have a lot of time left within his career. And to be quite honest with you, I don't think that Mikey Garcia has a lot of time left in his career either. And I don't think that Mikey Garcia is that old. I think maybe he's about 33 years old, 33 years old at most. Maybe he's about 31, somewhere around there. I'm not necessarily sure. The reason why I wanted to do this video in particular is because I do a lot of videos about Mr. Saul Canelo Alvarez on this channel. And the main reason why I do a lot of videos of Mr. Saul Canelo Alvarez, or Saul, however you pronounce the name correctly, I've heard it pronounced a multitude of ways, but Mr. Canelo Alvarez. The reason why I talk about Canelo Alvarez so much on this channel, it's not just him that I talk about, but I also talk about a certain amount of the other popular fighters as well, whether they be Canelo, a Terrence Bud Crawford, a Vasyl Lomachenko, or Gervonta Tank Davis. And I do address certain narratives that I think go on with certain fighters. So one of the fighters, all in all, that a certain amount of these boxing channels especially try to put a narrative out there about is Mr. Saul Canelo Alvarez. That is the main fighter, all in all, that they try to put it out there about, at least when you talk about the LDBC and new media type of channels, at least some of them, especially that of Anaki TV, Dante's Boxing Nation, and yada, 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 whoever else you want to bring up. And what they always say about Mr. Canelo Alvarez, and I've always been annoyed overall by these narratives, and that's the reason why I've really nipped a lot of them in the bud. I'm not a Canelo Alvarez fan. I'm not a person that, is a fan or, someone that venerates a lot of these fighters to a very, very high degree. And when I say that, it means that I don't worship these fighters, whereas a lot of people do. What I will say is this: I do have a great amount of respect for that of a Canelo Alvarez. The reason why that is because not only when I take a look at him do I think that I'm watching the creme de la creme, a fighter all in all that truly is next level. But he has fought repeated A-grade fighters. And like I said, the channels, they, or whoever has an agenda against Canelo, they can try to decline that all they want to. But at the end of the day, when you take a look at his resume, take a look at how many champions he has beaten when he comes down with that, also were in their prime or at a decent point in their career. The man has defeated Danny Jacobs when he was at the best point in his career. He defeated Miguel Cotto. Sure, he was a bit older and certainly smaller, but Miguel Cotto was still a very crafty fighter. I don't think a lot of people really realize how actually gifted you have to be to completely outbox someone like a Miguel Cotto. For a lot of you that, of course, did not have the graces of watching Miguel Cotto in his prime, he was one of the top, not just overall power punchers, not just most exciting fighters in the whole entire sport of boxing. He was one of the most intelligent fighters in the sport of boxing. And if you were near his own same size, it was going to be very difficult for you to defeat someone like a Miguel Cotto. Even Manny Pacquiao and Floyd Mayweather Jr. had a hell of a time with Miguel Cotto in certain rounds. So it just is what it is. Canelo was able to completely outbox him. He was able to completely embarrass Miguel Cotto almost in certain rounds. It was competitive in spots. But Canelo was mainly able to outthink him. He was able to outsmart him. That's why when people, whenever they say, oh, well, Canelo, he's all hyped. Once he starts facing these fighters that are 50-50 fights, I can tell what a 50-50 fight is. I've been watching boxing now for a little over 10 years. I can tell which fights are 50-50 fights and which fights, in my opinion, are not 50-50 fights. And in my opinion, Canelo Alvarez, unless we're talking about Artur Beterbiev, or unless we're talking about Dimitri Bivol, there is no 50-50 fights for Canelo Alvarez out there. You know why that is? Because I know the type of competition that Canelo Alvarez has been in the ring with overall in the past. And that has been a Caleb Plant. That has been a Callum Smith. That has been a Billy Joe Saunders. That has been a Adislani Lara. That has been a Gennady Triple G Golovkin. That has been a Danny Jacobs. That has been a Sergey Kovalev. A Miguel Cotto. All these fighters that I just mentioned, A-grade fighters. You can debate overall at the time, and Canelo was able to get past them all. Was there maybe a couple of controversial decisions here and there? You certainly could argue that. But at the end of the day, If Canelo were to retire today, the man, in my opinion, would be within my top 30 fighters of all time. He would be. He'd be on that Andre Ward, Joe Calzaghe type of level. That is the type of level that more than likely I would try to put him on. When it comes out, I think that would be a fair ranking. Here's the thing about Mikey Garcia. If we were to take a look at his career today, and if his career ended, yes, he's a 4-weight division champion. He is a legitimate 4-weight division champion. He's won, belts, official belts in 4 separate weight divisions. But if Mikey Garcia's career ended today, what does he have when it comes down to it that that we can really say that he's on the same level as that, like a Canelo Alvarez? This is why I say whenever we talk about Canelo Alvarez in one of my videos, and I always hear these channels or I hear these narratives saying like, oh, Canelo, he's ducking the best, he never fights elite champions, blah, 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 blah. He's ducking and dodging. That's not what Canelo Alvarez has done. Now, is that me saying that I agree with every single move that he's ever done? No. But when I take a look at Canelo, and if you truly know what you're watching, the man has fought repeated good name after repeated good name after repeated good name. Mikey Garcia is the exact opposite. And that's why overall I always like to bring up Mikey Garcia and sometimes start my videos. I don't think that the talent was ever a question with Mikey Garcia. But the big question about Mikey Garcia in his career was not only the motivation, in my opinion, but also the motivation to get the big fights out there. Because if Mikey Garcia retired today, let's also bring Terence Bud Crawford into this situation as well. Let's talk about him. If Terence Bud Crawford and Mikey Garcia were to retire today, who would you vote as the greater fighter? Now, a certain amount of you may say overall that it's Mikey Garcia. I would tend to disagree. Not only in my opinion do I think that Terence Bud Crawford, that he's debatably more skilled in certain areas, definitely more than Mikey Garcia. But Terence Bud Crawford, and if you've heard me in the past, I've never been a person that has said that, oh man, Terence, he has an A-grade resume. I don't think that he has the most impressive resume, but I can't 100% blame it on him. He fought who he needed to at 140 and 135. At 147, maybe you can blame it on him a little bit because maybe you can say that, he could have signed with the PBC. But Terence Bud Crawford, what I at least give him credit for is this, he has that win over Sean Showtime Porter. That, in my opinion, is at least an A- win. That was looked at as a very colossal win when Terence Bud Crawford got it. If Mikey Garcia were to retire today, does he have any win on his resume? Does he have any win on his record within the 40-something fights that he has? Does he have even a win that is on the Sean Porter level? Does he even have a win on that level? Now, some of you may argue, well, he has Orlando Salido. Well, he has Roman Martinez. Well, he has Adrian Broner. I don't think that any of those fighters are necessarily on the same level as the Sean Showtime Porter. Sean Showtime Porter, in my opinion, he's a first ballot Hall of Famer. Yes, he didn't win every single big fight in his career, but there's been many other fighters that are in the Boxing Hall of Fame, in my opinion. They lost to several big fights in their career as well, and I've already told people this. In my opinion, if you're at least a multiple weight division champion or a multiple time champion, even if you maybe won only one belt in your career, I think maybe you can have an argument that you made the Hall of Fame. Listen, Sean Porter, he was able to beat Danny Garcia. He was able to beat Poirier Masnagi. He was able to beat Devin Alexander, and he had tough fights with Kell Brook, Terence Crawford, Errol Spence Jr., Keith Thurman, all those guys. All those guys. Right? And there may even be a couple of other fighters that I'm not mentioning. Of course, he ended up getting the victory over Yordanis Ugas. I personally thought Ugas did win the fight, but whatever. At the end of the day, Sean Porter got the decision. It was a very, very close fight. So the big question is this: when Mikey Garcia is going to look back on his career, and when other people are going to look back on his career, what does Mikey Garcia really have to stand on? What leg does he really have to stand on if we're talking about where he is in terms of the all-time greats? And I'm not trying to be harsh here. I'm just being very blunt. Like I said, I'm a very decently blunt person when it comes down to it. I'm just telling the truth. It just is what it is. Mikey Garcia, at the end of the day, when Gamboa was at his top, when that was looked at as an A-grade fight, he didn't want to face Yuriorkis Gamboa. When Vasyl Lomachenko was the main threat at 135 pounds, he pulled the charade. He pulled the wool over a lot of people's eyes, and he said, oh, you know what? I don't want to face Lomachenko. I'm going to relinquish the WBC title at 135, and I'm going to go up 2 weight divisions when it comes down to it. I'm going to go up 2 weight divisions, and I'm going to face someone that is twice my size. And a lot of people really don't get the difference between what Canelo has done in his career and what a Mikey Garcia has done in their career, or maybe like what a Gervonta Tank Davis right now is doing in their career. And basically, like I said, there's a difference between what Canelo has done because, like I said, a lot of these channels, they'll say, oh, well, Canelo, he's been avoiding Charlo and Demetrius Andrade for years upon years. Listen, if you want to argue that those fights, that you would love to see those fights, I don't really have a problem with that. I think that those are great fights. And like I said, I'm not saying that I have agreed with every single move that Canelo Alvarez has done, but listen, at the end of the day, it's like this for me. Canelo fought Austin Trout when he had the win over Miguel Cotto. He fought Austin Trout when he was one of the number one contenders there. He fought Miguel Cotto when he was a Ring Magazine champion at middleweight. He fought Gennady, Triple G Golovkin when he was a top 3 pound-for-pound fighter in almost every single list out there. He fought Danny Jacobs when he was the IBF middleweight champion. He fought Caleb Plant. He fought Billy Joe Saunders. He fought Callum Smith. All of them were champions, legitimate champions, not these bullshit regular, champions or interim champions. They were legitimate either super champions or official belt champions or Ring Magazine champions. That's what they were. He also fought Lara. He fought Kovalev. All those guys at that point in time in their career deserved a decent amount of respect. When Mikey Garcia fought certain opponents like Orlando Salido and Roman Martinez, that's not me saying that these guys did not deserve a certain amount of respect, but can you really even compare some of those wins to some of the wins that a Canelo Alvarez has? You can't even compare it. They're on completely two different planets, in my opinion, completely two different stratospheres. It just is what it is, and I know a certain amount of people, they'll disagree with me on that, but it just is what it is. I think that Mikey, had he really went after the big fights, I think that he could have became a really, really, really all-time great boxer. But Mikey Garcia, with now the way that his career has transpired, Mikey is certainly a first ballot Hall of Famer. I don't think there's any doubt about that. He's going to make the first ballot Hall of Fame. He has some decent wins. He has the win over, Zlatan Slatichinin, who was undefeated at the time, or Dejan Slatichinin, whatever the hell his name was. That dude from the Balkans who knocked out Ivan Redkach, was the first one to defeat Ivan Redkach. Who ended up kind of being a hype job anyway, but it is what it is. And then on top of that, he ended up getting a win over Robert Easter. He ended up getting a win over Adrian Broner, Orlando Salido, blah, 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 Roman Martinez. We all know that Mikey Garcia's resume is very, very decent. And of course, he also has a win actually over a former welterweight champion, I believe, in Jesse Vargas. So we all know that Mikey Garcia is a real deal fighter when he's at his best. The thing is, how many real legitimate 50-50 fights have you been in your career? And I know a lot of people, they'll take a look at it and they'll say, oh, he fought Errol Spence. He was trying to be brave. That's not what trying to be brave is. What Mikey Garcia did is that, and a lot of people don't tend to understand this, it was the same thing with what Kell Brook did with Errol Spence Jr. Kell Brook said, you know what, I would rather get my ass kicked when it comes down to it by Gennady Triple G Golovkin at the middleweight division, because if I do, it's pretty much a win-win situation for me. And fighters think this, much later on down the line. They do. They do. Let me explain overall their mindset, because I know exactly what Mikey Garcia was doing. It was the exact same shit that Kell Brook did to Errol Spence Jr. What these fighters do, when you see a fighter move up 2 weight classes all of a sudden out of nowhere, and Canelo has not usually done that. He moves up 1 weight class to 1 weight class to 1 weight class, and he faces the best challenges there. That's not what Mikey Garcia has ever done. Mikey Garcia, what he does necessarily is that he actually does find weak links at these divisions. No one legitimately thought that Sergey Lipinets at 140 pounds actually had a legitimate chance over him. It was a competitive fight in certain rounds, but Mikey clearly won the fight. There was nothing that he could super duper threaten him with, not even just in terms of the athleticism or power, but Sergey Lipinets, he's never been really looked at as someone that's, in my opinion, is an A-grade boxer. Mikey Garcia, when he finally had that opportunity to finally face that, top 5 pound-for-pound guy at the time, Mr. Vasily Lomachenko, what did Mikey Garcia do? He went up 2 weight classes and he said, oh, I'm gonna face Errol Spence Jr., because I want to challenge myself to be great. That's not what it was. When fighters all of a sudden move up 2 weight divisions out of nowhere, what that basically means is that there's someone in my natural weight division that I don't want to face, and I'm afraid is going to whoop my ass. And it's going to look better basically on my resume, even if I do lose to that fighter later on, if I already have suffered a loss, especially a knockout loss or a very dominant loss when it comes down to it, to a fighter that pretty much was twice my size. Or if somehow I end up pulling off the victory, then basically I'm on top of the world, and then basically I have another excuse to not face that fighter. Then I end up looking good anyway. So it's pretty much a win-win situation for people that do that. There was no losing for Mikey Garcia except his health, of course, in that fight. But if he were to face Vasily Lomachenko, and this is what a lot of people don't understand, if he were to face Vasily Lomachenko, then all in all, he could basically say 10 years later on down the road and basically say, yeah, I lost to Lomachenko, but you know what? I was never personally the same after I got beat overall by Errol Spence Jr. I don't think that I ever should have done that. It was a mistake. And I can tell that Mikey Garcia, for these past few years, he really wanted that Manny Pacquiao fight. It was alleged that that fight was going to happen. It was alleged overall that he was going to do that. He wanted that big payday. He didn't get it. He ended up overall, facing Sandor Martin. He didn't take him that seriously. And I don't think Mikey Garcia is super duper motivated in his career at this point in time. So when it came down to it, Mikey, he fought Sandor Martin. He got outboxed in a 10-round fight. And now you can tell that Mikey Garcia, I think that he looks back at his career and he says, wow, now I'm pretty much in a very precarious situation. Now I'm not really going to be remembered as one of those all-time great fighters. Before, I think that he still had a decent amount of the wool over people's eyes. Before, I think that the facade and the smoke and mirrors still was working. It's not working at this point in time. And Mikey Garcia knows that if he is going to be remembered as a decently great fighter, or maybe if he's going to get a decent payday, he has to get a couple of good wins. That's why, in my opinion, now Mikey Garcia is calling out Terrence Bud Crawford. Now he's calling out Devin Haney. He never called out any of these guys before. He never called out any of these legitimate A-grade fighters before. The only time that he ever actually legitimately called out Vasily Lomachenko is when he knew that Vasily Lomachenko was going to say no, because Vasily Lomachenko suffered a completely, popped out of place and torn a ligament in his shoulder in the Jorge Linares fight. So basically, Lomachenko said, well, I need a tune-up fight before I face you because my shoulder is injured, and then, certain channels like Dante's Boxing Nation, they said, oh, well, Mikey, he called out Lomachenko. No, he called out Lomachenko when he knew that Lomachenko was going to say no. But then when Lomachenko beat Jose Pedraza and then called him out multiple times, what did Mikey Garcia do? He relinquished his WBC title. So when people overall try to compare Canelo Alvarez to that of a Mikey Garcia, or say all in all that he's avoiding all these fighters, no, a real fighter that has done that in his career has been Mikey Garcia. And I respect Mikey Garcia. Mikey Garcia, I don't know what he's like outside the ring. I don't know, who he is as a person. I don't really care because that's not really what I'm analyzing. All I know is that Mikey Garcia, even though I thought that he was otherworldly talented, when you really take a look at his resume, what's there? It's basically all smoke and mirrors. And that's why we can't compare someone like a Canelo and a Mikey Garcia. Because Canelo is a person that is a legitimate 4-weight division champion. He's a person that has A-grade win after A-grade win after A-grade win. Canelo is a person that if he retired today, he'd be a top 50 boxer of all time, hands down. Can we say the same thing about Mikey Garcia? No, we cannot. All right, no, we cannot. Mikey, in my opinion, is not even over boxers like a Terrence Bud Crawford or Vasily Lomachenko, certain people that, in my opinion, would not necessarily be on the same level as a solo Canelo Alvarez, at least as of yet. You know what I mean? He can't be above those fighters. He can't be above a Tyson Fury. He can't be above Alexander Usyk. He can't be above, in my opinion, an Errol Spence Jr. He can't be above any of those fighters. All those fighters, in my opinion, have greater wins, and they had better careers. And if Mikey, in my opinion, would have went after the bigger fights, in my opinion, he could have had a greater career, but he never was interested in that. So it is what it is. But anyways, I just thought that I would talk about that because I've been saying this for years upon years upon years upon years, and I think now finally a certain amount of people are starting to finally see what I've been saying. But anyways, that's really about it for today. But just to talk about one last thing, just to put something into perspective here. If Mikey actually did face a Terrence Bud Crawford at this point in time, now once again, do I think that the fight is likely? No, I do not. But if Mikey did face Terrence Bud Crawford, I think that not only does Mikey now want to prove himself because he realizes that he's pretty much in a very, very deep hole, but on top of that, when it comes down to it, I think Mikey knows that he would get a decent payday. And if Terrence Bud Crawford were to face off with Mikey next, he probably would knock his ass out. I mean, I don't think there's any doubt about that. Now, like I said, I know with my voice and, it sounds like I have a little bit more emotion in this video than usual. I have no personal gripe with Mikey. But like I said, it's just interesting how I see a certain amount of these narratives about certain fighters that people may not like, whether it be, Canelo or Terrence Bud Crawford or whoever the fighter may be, and I've seen it with Tyson Fury as well when the channels, of course, didn't like him. And they'll allege that, oh, well, these guys are avoiding this guy, they're avoiding this guy, they're avoiding this guy. A fighter, you have to know the difference between a fighter that actually is avoiding the big fights and maybe just certain fights that didn't happen. Mikey Garcia and Gervonta Tank Davis, those are legitimate examples of fighters that have slithered in and out of the weight divisions, pretty much picking off the weakest links that they could. Those are real life examples. Canelo Alvarez is not that example. All right, so it is what it is. But anyways, that's really about it for today. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll talk to you all later.